Hey guys, this is Tom and this is Quick Watercolour Birds. In this episode we're going to be using a couple more colours and we're going to step away from just a black bird, but we're going to keep it simple with a black and white bird, but look at how we can have a bit more fun with those colours, just as we did with the raven. Okay, so we are going to be painting an Avocet. Beautiful little bird, lovely shapes. There's a simplicity to them because they are just black and white. But what we're going to see is, just as in the raven we didn't work with just black, just because we're doing a black and white bird doesn't mean we're going to paint with just black and white or grey. What we're actually going to look at is putting some lovely colours into the shadow side of the white areas. So when you look at the white area of a bird, don't think about it all being white, think about it as where the light is hitting is white. But as everything moves into shadow, whatever depth of shadow that is, we've got an opportunity for loads of lovely colours. So in this video, I'm going to be using Ultramarine Blue, which is a lovely purpley soft blue, and that's going to give us some lovely soft colours in the shadow side of the white areas. Don't forget we're going to use a lovely orangey red because that's going to kind of cancel out some aspects of that and give us those lovely rich deep darks. But also, let's always remember, even as black moves into sunlight, it doesn't stay dark and black. It's going to maybe warm up and become slightly more browny red, especially in the case of an Avocet. So the red is going to be great for that. And we're going to introduce a yellow, which might seem odd because you're thinking, well, where on earth is the yellow in that bird? But the idea of the yellow is, if we're struggling to get a deep dark with the ultramarine and the more orangey red, in this case Pyrole Red, chucking a yellow in there is going to kind of cancel it out and help us go darker. It's going to help us create more neutral colours. So that's it, one of each primary. We're going to keep it simple and we're going to keep it creative. Let the paint do its thing. Okay, so there we go. I've got my drawing, I've got my brushes, I've got my paints, and I will have my water in a sec. I just want to quickly talk you through the drawing. So I tend to draw out first in a 2H, and then if I want to go a little bit darker, I go to just an HB. So you don't need anything particularly fancy. I've done my drawing a little bit darker than I might normally do just for the video. And then one thing that I quite often do once I've got my drawing is I take my rubber and I lightly rub everything out and obviously brush everything away. And that gives me a nice solid drawing, but it's just a little bit lighter. It's up to you what you want to do. I personally like seeing little bits of the drawing showing through in the final piece. Other people like those drawings to be much paler, but that's totally personal preference. Very quickly talk you through the drawing. So what we've got is obviously the Avocet, and again, just like the crow, I'm looking for the big shapes first. So look at how, yes, there's loads of kind of markings in the bird, but actually overall it's basically just an egg shape with a couple of little triangles stuck on the back. Then the head we could almost picture as just a circle. And the big thing is, how big is that circle relative to that egg? Where is that circle in relation to the egg? You know, comparing proportions and where things are placed. And then, like I spoke of last time, is the tilt or the angle of everything that you're drawing. So yes, it's an egg shape, but it's got a very specific kind of angle if you drew a line through the middle of it. Imagine how much different the character would look if I flattened that egg shape out or I made it much steeper. Not to say it's right or wrong, but it would completely change the pose of the animal. Equally, the neck has a very specific kind of angle through it, and the head itself, especially running into the beak, again has a very specific angle to it. So what we've got are these kind of zigzags and angles and the way that they kind of react with each other. Don't forget, if you want the line drawing of this, you can hop over onto my Patreon page and hopefully soon my website as well, and you can download the line drawing and have a go yourself. But we're going to get straight into the painting. Okay, so here we go. Remember, we're going to let the paint just do its thing. Lots of water, lots of pigment to start with. We've got a nice drawing, but really we can just dive in and start to get things down. So this is going to represent the white in shadow. And don't forget, if that's a bit of a harsh mark, we can go in with a damp brush and just soften an edge. So we hit that edge with a damp brush, and then we're going to bring that down here, down the front of the bird to about there. And then we're going to take that same colour and just bring it down here. And imagine this is like the shadow just hugging the side of the bird And we're going to come in there and we're going to take that same shadow into there. It's almost like he's casting a shadow on his own back. Then if you want to soften an edge, remember we're going with the damp brush, and I think that's what I'm going to show you, is kind of softening edges in the quick tips section, so keep an eye out for that a little bit further along in the painting. We're going to come under here, just let the brush do a lot of the work. Look for that broken brush stroke if we can. We almost get the illusion of feathers without really having to do a lot. That's when we're just letting the brush kind of break over the page and we get these lovely little areas like that kind of coming back under there. And again, we want a slightly softer edge here, so with a damp brush we can just hit that edge so it just softens it down, and there we've got a nice lovely shadow. Then while it's still wet, I'm going to mix a nice slightly more saturated, so if you remember in the first video I was talking about using more saturated paint, and this isn't going to be that dark. It's going to be like a sort of muddy brown colour, which is almost going to represent the dark areas, but in kind of as they move into light. Remember I was talking about the black kind of moving into sunlight. And again, so spending just a little bit more time here. Doesn't need to be neat, and then we can start to break in here. And what I want is kind of that colour to bleed into the shadow that I've just put down. So that is the bird in shadow. If you really want, you can start to just get it so not such a neat line there. We can break it a little bit, give it the illusion of feathers, and look at how that's really nicely kind of bleeding into the shadows. I'm then going to leave that for a wee while, and we're going to come over here and we're going to start kind of popping that in. Look, I'm just letting the brush do the work. Just look at those lovely black markings that are on this bird, and we're just going to keep it that simple. And then while this is still damp, we can start to drop in our really deep dark in there. So we're going to get a really deep dark from using lots of ultramarine and lots of the red, and while it's still wet, look how we can just place it in there, and we can start to use a slightly dry brush to get a few more kind of interesting marks going on. But again, let the paint do its thing. While it's still damp up here, I'm going to lay in the darker paint, and especially down here. So this is not got so much water in because I don't want it to shoot into the shadow side of the bird. And you can see how quickly we get a really lovely feeling Avocet. I'm now going to take this down into here. We're going to just hit the edge of that there and trap that there. And we're going to, this is probably the hardest part of the bird, is getting that beak right, but just load up the brush with a nice amount of paint, but not too much. And we're just going to try and get it in one sweep if we can, something like that. Requires a bit of a steady hand, but it's totally doable. And look how we've got that lovely feeling of light hitting the bird there. And look, we've got black in shadow, kind of black in sunlight. And we're going to take our ultramarine and we're going to strengthen some of those shadows. So look how we could go a little bit darker with some of these shadows under here. What you'll notice with watercolour, quite often the paint dries a little bit lighter than you put it on. We're now going to work down into here. And see, we're just strengthening those shadows. So this paint is still kind of damp down here. We can definitely strengthen that shadow. So I'm just letting the paint kind of blend and merge together. That's what we want. So we're going to go stronger in shadow there. We're going to bring it down here. We're going to do that sort of thing. We're going to come over here and we're going to sort of break up this area here. See how I'm avoiding the eye for now. We are then going to come into this bit here. If I do it too quickly while this is still really wet, all the paint's going to merge together loads. But if I let this almost dry and then come back in and have a go at doing that, we will get a nice wet into wet edge. Whoops, sorry. But it won't blend too much. We'll just get a nice softness to it. And then all I'm doing is just painting the shadow side of this white area of the bird. So we're getting all of these lovely colours in the shadow side of the bird. And then, so, I mean, very quickly we've got something that's really working there. So now I'm going to go to a smaller brush, less paint, no, sorry, less water, more paint. And I'm going to start giving stronger colours in some of these areas while it's still wet. So that's the secret. Get it while it's wet and you get these lovely soft edges going on. Bit too strong in colour, so we can pull some out. We get a little bit of detail in this leg, but not too much. We can go a little bit darker under there. The paint, remember, is going to dry lighter than we put it on. I just want to go a little bit darker on this underside here. So see how that's a really harsh mark? It's too hard a mark, too harsh. So I go in with my damp brush. As long as I'm careful, don't go too heavy-handed, we can just soften that mark down. Just into there, and we can even hit it with a slightly darker colour so that we get that lovely soft edge between the beak and the underside of the bird there. And we're kind of very quickly homing in on our subject being finished here. Okay, so there's still a bit more to do to finish it off, but one thing you will have noticed is I'm laying down colours, especially the blues, and then I'm softening edges so that they're a little bit smoother in their transition between shadow and light. We don't want to do it everywhere. Here's a nice hard edge, but here I wanted a slightly softer edge. So in the quick tips, I'm going to show you how to achieve this with a damp brush. So what you've been seeing me do a lot of in this one, and I do a lot anyway, and it's a really great little watercolour tip, is softening edges. So if we take our ultramarine here and we lay that down, and it's a very sharp mark. So if we then take a damp brush with less pigment in and a little bit more water, we can hit that edge there. See how it just instantly softens it down? We end up with a much softer mark, and then we can put the paint back into it as well and then watch it kind of bleed into there. So let's kind of just explore that in a little bit more detail. It's not a hugely advanced technique, but it's something that's really useful. So again, let's go a little bit more pigment so it's darker and a little bit less water. There we go, you might be able to see it a bit better. Then I wash my brush out completely, take off the excess water so it's damp but not sopping wet, and we just kind of run our brush along the edge there. See how it softens the edge? What you're effectively doing is creating a clear wash of water here that this wash kind of runs into, and it gives you a much softer edge. And to some extent, watercolour's fairly forgiving, that you can keep working that edge and keep softening it. You pick up some of the pigment from over here and bring it over here. And look how you can get this lovely soft broken edge. Just have a play with it. There's so many different ways to do it. You can then go back in with your more saturated paint, less water, more paint, and you can load that edge. So we're kind of loading the wash here, and we end up with this lovely transition from kind of dark to light. So many different ways to work with watercolour, but that's a really interesting one. Let's have a look at a different colour. Let's go with our red. We're going to do a wash over here. So again, very hard, sharp line. If I'm quick, with a damp brush, very little water, sorry, very little paint and a little bit of water, look how we can hit that edge and soften it down. And we can keep washing out the brush, go back again and hit that edge. We can even work into that wash there. This is the joy of watercolour, the way all the colour kind of floats together. And look at that, that's a really lovely thing going on there. And then the joy of it is we can go back in with much less water, very strong paint, and just hit that edge there. And then if I mix a little bit of ultramarine, still not much water, and then I hit that edge again, look at what the paint's doing. And again we end up with this lovely soft transition of colour. Let's do it one more time with the yellow just because. And we'll try it with a smaller brush on a smaller scale. So I'm going to mix my new Gamboge Yellow, which we've barely touched in the painting itself. We're going to lay it down there. Again, really hard line. Let's try it with a smaller brush. Just pure water in the brush. And we can, with a really light touch, we can just soften that edge down. And as long as we don't work the paint too much, we'll be fine. The trick is to know when to stop. If I was to go back into this lovely blue now, which is ultramarine, and look how it's kind of granulated as well. I've got this really beautiful granulation, kind of a dark to light transition. If I was to go back now and start scrubbing around and trying to soften the edge, we'd make a right pickle of it. It would look overworked, it would go messy. Equally, this is probably dry now that I couldn't do much more with it. We might just be able to, this new colour that we've just put down, with a little bit of a gentle touch, we could probably just about pick up that edge and work with it and soften it. But once it's dry past a certain point, we don't really want to go in and fiddle with it too much. That's when we get that kind of overworked look. And then just because it's there, why not? An opportunity to have a look. Less water, more paint. This is still kind of wet, but not that wet. Just going to lay that in there. And we can, again, as long as we've got a light touch, if we want that to bleed a little bit more, I'm going to take my yellow again, and we can just hit that edge. I've picked up a little bit of blue there. So that's it, guys. That's kind of softening an edge, having a play with the paint, seeing what the paint does, getting used to how the paint flows, getting used to your brushes, just messing around and having fun, which is the whole point of these paintings and the whole point of these little exercises. Okay, so there we go, kind of softening edges. And now, just to finish this off for just a few minutes, we've got a nice deep dark over here, which I'm going to try and get with just a couple of simple brush strokes. That sort of thing. And then just needs tightening up a little bit, stick a bit more blue in there, keep a little bit of light at the back. And then really we've just got the eye and a couple more little flicks of paint here and there. Look how the paint has just kind of merged together here, and it's created kind of this almost like a cauliflower. We've got some soft edges, the colours have merged together. Our tendency is to think that we need to kind of neaten that up, but actually we don't need to at all. What's really lovely about this is letting the paint just do its thing. So now I'm going to come in here with an almost dry brush. So if you remember last time in the quick tips section, I was looking at using a dry brush. So we've got our very wet paint, our slightly more damp paint, less water, and then this is quite dry paint. And we can use it just to pop on little accents and details here and there, just to help things along a little bit more. Don't need too much of it. In fact, that's probably it. It's really just the eye to do, and I think I just want to put in a slightly darker kind of little mark just there and under there, just to give it a bit more shape. And then we're into the eye. And that's it. Quick watercolour birds. That's the idea. We're going to keep it really simple, really quick. Focus on nice, interesting shapes and just the right amount of detail. So in here, I'm going to zoom in on that so you guys can see it much better. So the eye, what are we going to do for the eye? There's so many different things you can do. Remember, these are quick, simple birds. We're going to leave a little bit of light under there. I'm going to my smaller brush, obviously, and we're just going to leave a little highlight, just like that. And that's it. Obviously, in a different painting, we could do a more detailed eye. And as time goes on, I'm going to show you how to do just a little bit more detail. We're going to expand upon all of this stuff that we've been looking at and kind of build on it as time goes on. But there we go, guys. That's it. We've got the white of the page representing the light. Anywhere where the white has gone into shadow, we've basically just got ultramarine, fairly neat. In places I went a little bit darker just to give it a bit more strength and a bit more form. And then we've also got black in sunlight, has got this kind of warm purpley tinge to it, where it was ultramarine but with a tiny bit of the red in there. If it goes too purpley, then I add a tiny bit of the yellow to make it a little bit more muddy, but I didn't use much yellow here. And then just as the black goes into shadow, that's when we use the ultramarine with the red, and it gives us much less water, so it's got a really intense, rich darkness to it. And while that kind of light purpley colour was still wet, that's when I dropped in the deep dark. And that's it. We just let the paint do its thing. So there we go, a black and white bird doesn't have to be just black and white. We've got a lovely array of colours there. You could do even more with the colour if you wanted to. What I love about painting in Avocet is we're dealing with a lot of interesting kind of abstract shapes and little jigsaw pieces that we're kind of melding together to create the form of the bird. And also, what you will have seen in that video was an opportunity to work a little bit more kind of damp into wet. So I might have a slightly lighter kind of purpley ultramarine shadow for the white area. While that's still kind of damp, it's not fully dry, you were seeing that I was dropping in more saturated dark and then just letting it gently bleed together so that we get these lovely soft edges in the shadows. And that's something I really want you guys to focus on. Softer shadows, and then where the light is hitting certain areas, we end up with slightly more sharper, harder lights. So that was a really fun one. The idea is that we're going to keep expanding on top of this by introducing more colour, slightly more interesting shapes and all of that sort of stuff, but we're going to keep it simple. We're going to keep letting the paint just do its thing. Don't forget, you can hop over to my Patreon page where I will share the link down below, and you can publicly download my line drawing that I've done for you guys to follow at home. And as always, on Patreon there's loads more tiers if there's kind of other stuff that you want to get into. I do tutorials, question and answers, and you can also see live streams, quick tips, and support the podcast over there. So there's loads of opportunity on Patreon, and it's a great way for me to connect a little bit more deeply with kind of followers and fans and people that are just into painting in general, and build a little bit of an online community. So if that sounds like something you want to try out, hop over there, and don't forget to subscribe and like this video because there's going to be loads more to come. As usual, stay creative, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next video.